an original.
From Story Studio Network.
If Comrade Kamala Harris gets 4 more years, you will be living a full-blown banana republic.
If you got something to say...
Well, here we go. Look at that. It's Now and Next on the morning after. They were ready to rumble. They did so last night in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we're back in the saddle with a lot of good fodder and stuff to talk about. And that would be the post-debate after Trump faced off against Harris, or Harris faced off against Trump, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Hard to tell, but we're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so sifting through the entrails of that post-debate. And who better to do that than David Schultz is here with us from Hamline University, and John Wright from Maru Public Opinion. And guys, I don't know where we start with this, except to say I flipped around, but I wanted to make sure I was in the right place at the right time, and that would be as soon as the debate finished last night. David, I was watching Fox News because I thought that was going to be the telltale for me as to where this conversation was going to go. And Brett Hume immediately said, well, you know, blah, blah, blah. She didn't answer to this. She didn't account for that. But let's face it, Donald Trump had a bad night. That was the top line last night out of Fox. Now, they tried other things and, you know, to dance around whatever the issues may or may not have been. But for me, that set the tone in terms of the struggle that Donald Trump is going to have over the next 55 days.
I think you're absolutely correct here, is that if you think about the game plans that both Harris and Trump wanted to execute, Harris wanted to what? Introduce herself, perhaps distance herself from Biden, and really provoke Trump into going into tirades and going off message. She clearly succeeded in doing that. Trump's game plan was to stay focused on the issues of immigration and the economy, and he got distracted. And if I just think of it in terms of body language and in terms of the variety of things which we'll talk about today, Harris won on so many different scores. But I'm going to bring up something. I think everybody's going to say she won. The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post said she won. Swing voters interviewed said she won. But most of the swing voters are saying they're still not sure if it really mattered in terms of how they're going to vote. Yeah, John, it was one of those things that David points out in terms of it's okay to say this was great entertainment. It might have been one of the most engaging bits of debate television I've seen in a long time. But did it move the needle?
Yeah, and I agree totally with David. We bring to debates a construct in our minds that is often based on experience with debates, looking at real debates in terms of whether you can win points or not on policy and things like that, about, you know, how it looks overall, but also how we see the world. And if you see the world as a place that's stable and that you can have rational discussions and that you are not going to take in people who are rude and interrupt and do those sort of things, well, then she clearly won. But what we've witnessed in the polls for the longest time, and I will point out in the national polls now, either tied or slightly ahead is Donald Trump, that doesn't really matter to the people who vote for him. What really matters, and what caught my attention last night, is that if the United States election is swung on, let's say, 400,000 votes, I mean, let's put it that way. In some of these swing states, it's 50 to 150,000 people who decide to go to the polls and vote one way or the other. Then what Kamala Harris said last night when it came to the invasion of Ukraine is that she targeted the 80,000 Polish residents in Pennsylvania in terms of how they would feel about the United States stepping away from the table and allowing Putin to go in and do everything that they've done. So we're talking about micro-targeting there, and we're also talking about a population that has become used to this president, former president, for the last many, many years and still holds half the country. So, I mean, if this was Canada and you were looking at 5 parties, and if you could get power with 34% of the vote, last night would have been done, dinner finished. But I don't think so. Even he got 30% more talking times because the moderators didn't shut off the mic and he was able to address his group. So I think, as I said earlier today to another individual, we're going to have to wait for probably another 5 to 6 days to find out in the public domain the polling results that give a bounce one way or the other. And even if there is a bounce, the question is then, before Election Day, does this matter?
Well, let me ask you this, though. I realize the numbers are – sorry, David. I realize the numbers are important as far as the polls are concerned. But the one I'm going to watch is the amount of money she raises. I suspect that was an incredible fundraising opportunity for her last night.
It probably was, but I still want to come back to the poll numbers again and the moving of public opinion, because dollars are important, but at some point, remember, it's about votes at the end of the day. And first I was going to say with John, you're an optimist saying 400,000. I think it's about 200,000 voters myself, but we can quibble. We can quibble with how many people she actually has to move at this point. But it's an incredibly small number of people that have to be moved at this point. And it's still just not clear at this point that she moved, because the debate really wasn't about changing Trump voters' minds. They're solid behind him. Nothing she's going to do is going to convince Trump voters to say, gosh, I'm not going to vote for Trump now. It's motivating her base. And at the same time, remember, it's only about 2%, 3% of the voters are undecided, is moving those few people. I actually think the most significant thing that happened last night, Taylor Swift saying she's going to vote for Kamala Harris. I actually think that's far more important, because the people who support her, Taylor Swift, generally don't vote. If they actually come out and vote, that could make a bigger impact on the election.
I thought the timing of that was just brilliant in terms of earned media. You had to know, John, that the whole endorsement from Taylor Swift was part of the package, that Harris had to have known that this was coming, all the while she was baiting Trump.
Yeah, and again, I think Dave and I are on the same wavelength this morning. And again, it's about the construct of elections and how you use media nowadays. You can raise as much money as you want, but unless you, in fact, have bought up all of that time, which Trump's party had done during the summer for all the advertising in the swing states, if you don't control the social media part of it either, then you're not going to win this election. So having Taylor Swift immediately do this energizes the Democratic base, but more importantly, young women, for which Kamala Harris holds the lion's share of the vote over her opponent. If she can motivate a few 100,000 more votes at those polls in those swing states and across the country, that's going to make a huge difference. So again, if a celebrity 10 years ago had endorsed a candidate, you'd say, well, there's Jimmy Buffett or whoever, no, that's going to matter to people who were in the 60s and want this kind of president. So that doesn't matter anymore. That did last night. So I think you got to look at the little pieces, because that's what this election is all about, motivating small groups of people, and that really hit.
Well, and to say, to follow up on that in terms of the social media impact, the number of impressions, the earned media, David, that he or Kamala Harris got from the Taylor Swift endorsement is one thing, but also understanding that most of the people who are responding to the debate did not, as we three did, stayed up until the wee hours and watched it and watched the after shows and all of the, back and forth in the spin room. They are waiting for podcasts like this. They're waiting for memes on the internet. They're waiting for the social media play here. And I think in many ways, she wins. That is, Harris wins on that count going away. And if we're playing and nibbling around the edges, I think that's fairly significant.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's incredibly important, because I think you're absolutely right that almost nobody is going to watch 90 minutes of the debate. Most people are going to, as I was saying to somebody, at the time it was taking place, people are tuning in and out. They're putting their kids to bed. A whole bunch of things are going on at that point. And for those undecided voters, guess what? They're probably not even watching the debate. They're doing other things. So I think you're absolutely correct. It is the podcast. It is the social media. It is, I'm not even sure it's the spins. I don't think at the end of the day that people really care about this, what they used to call the spin doctors. I think it's going to be what their friends say and what they see on Instagram or something like that.
Well, and I think this will be the clip that gets played more often than not, and it's just going to be for shits and giggles.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again.
So he hit on all of the headlines there, but really didn't answer much of the question that was asked. But it really didn't matter. And I think, John, to the point around turning the mics off, in that case, you could hear Harris kind of giggling and laughing and being so dismissive in the background off mic. It had, I think, more of a dismissive actual effect than it did if the mics had been open.
Yeah, let me be contrary. Well, first of all, let me say, I thought from a rational point of view, if you were living on another planet, she came in and held her own and won the debate on a logic point of view. She didn't even answer the first question going in. She twisted it to make her answer what she wanted to,
Sure.
So that was fine. To me, she was the first candidate in 8 years that I've seen, or maybe even further, to actually stand up to him and not wither on stage. I mean, she was able to. I mean, Marco Rubio and all the other ones have just been blown away. The people who were most intimidated last night were the ABC moderators who wouldn't shut off the mic, and he got 30 minutes more talking time. But look, if you were part of his base, if you are motivated and believe that she's a Marxist and believe that the country's going to be taken away, you will also believe that they are eating cats and dogs in that place and across the country. He came back to immigration, bang, 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 over and over and over again, because those are the issues that matter to his side of the table. So even though we can chuckle about it and laugh in it, in the construct of a balanced world, a rational world, you know what? With 30 extra minutes of time to get those two messages across, that immigration is terrible and that the Marxist is going to take away your country, that matters in the days going forward.
There was polling, David, before the debate that suggested, a significant number of voters still needed to get to know Harris. And, again, depending on what network you were watching, she did or didn't succeed in that. But to John's point, I still thought she rung the bells that answered some of the questions around what will she do about the economy. She talked about the opportunity economy. She kept coming back to the tax benefits for startups and, families that were having, their own businesses. She really made an effort to look into the camera and make this about you. And she was important to say it's not about him.
Yeah, I think one of the things that she did, and I think it was subtle, was her effort to connect with the American public. And I think that was important for her, is that at the end of the day, I'm not completely sure what voters are saying they want to hear or have to say. I'm not sure if they want her to go out. In fact, I doubt they want her to go into a lot of detail. How's she going to create 3 million new homes, et cetera, like that. She was really selling her persona in the same way that Trump has sold his persona to his base. And again, for my Democratic friends, they're saying, oh, she hit it out of the park. She probably did. But for those people who are still unsure and actually watched, I don't know if she did. I don't know. And I don't really know what she has to do to seal the deal at this point. Which you're and I guess John and I are sort of saying something very similar here in the sense that she's not going to change the Trump people. She's maybe going to motivate a few more Democrats to vote, but among those, whether it's 400,000, 200,000, whatever it is, voters, I'm not sure what she walked away with in terms of how she affected them.
Yeah, I begin to wonder whether or not this was more of a reset button as opposed to a momentum button, David. I just because there was the expectations on both sides for her were fairly low. So I think she won on that respect. She exceeded the expectations expressed. But at least it's a level playing field.
Well, what we have now is that she clearly had the momentum for several weeks. The momentum halted somewhere around 7 to 10 days ago. She didn't get the bump coming out of the convention. I was telling people if she came out of the convention with about a 5 or 6 point lead, with the normal convention bump, she should feel pretty good at that point. She came out dead even. So the momentum was not, wasn't going there. Did the debate on Tuesday night restart the momentum? I don't know. Again, I don't know at this point. Again, this is where I think John's point is, let's look at the polls in about 7 days and see what it says. I agree with you, Dave, that the money's going to come in. I agree that the Democrats are going to feel enthusiastic about what happened. But in terms of real momentum shift, in terms of what's happening, I don't know. And keep in mind, by the way, there are states like mine which start voting on September 20th. So voting is going to start within the next 3 to 4 weeks, if not less in some places. And I think we need to factor that into our equation too. How are voters making up their minds, and are they heading off to the ballots early to vote?
Does that help or hurt her, David? Or either way, does it cut out either way, that early vote?
When the last few elections, I would say it helps her because Democrats have been more likely to vote early. But given the fact that it is so close right now, and she has to worry about bringing over some of those undecided voters, I'm not sure it necessarily helps her with the undecided voters. But I want to defer to John, the pollster, tell me what he thinks in terms of that, because I think this is a really good question.
Well, I think, it used to be a case where older people went to the polls and you would get a bit of a bounce when it comes on election night if it was counted early. There you go. But the issue that you get in nowadays is, of course, and it has been for the last decade, is everybody goes to the polls and takes buses and organization to get people there to vote early. Look, I got to be a cynical kind of guy when I listen to all this stuff. A few things pop to mind. Number one, and I think this is really important, I agree with David, if she'd come off with a bounce, which she did right at the start from the convention, what struck me was they played a front runner game. They hit her. I mean, she did rallies, very scripted, but she wasn't out doing media. I mean, she was also only allowed to have certain amounts of airtime because the Trump organization had bought up all kinds of stuff. And I thought she was in a bubble. And I think if she's in a bubble, it's going to kill her because his message is going to get out more and more and more. But to the point of the advanced polling as well, advanced polling can make a difference. But what I'm concerned about is the mail-in vote this time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's more important because what will, of course, happen on the night of the election is that you will get the advanced polls plus the regular polls in play that night. It's the mail-in that will come probably over the next 48 hours. And what last election showed was Republicans led on that night. So the Republicans are going to get their people out as soon as possible to show on election night that they have won, even though they may lose over the next 48 hours in terms of the mail-in vote. So again, if you come to a construct where everything works perfectly and you get all the votes in at the end of the night, then in the old days, it was kind of like, well, just drive them to the polls and make as many as possible vote. The problem is that Democrats, they don't necessarily get as many on a proportional basis going out to vote in advance. And that will change the narrative on election night unless she does extraordinarily well.
Well, okay, so here's what we'll do. We'll give this a few weeks to percolate, and we'll let you guys do all of your wizardry and magic and see where we're going with this, because I think it is going to be very in the weeds and granular, as hard as it is to, maybe sometimes follow that. But to your point, it may be not election night, but 4 or 5 days, as we had last time, David, that we're actually going to get a definitive result.
I think you're absolutely right. And I guess I'll make 2 predictions here. One of them is that I'll go out on a limb. The person who gets the most votes in the critical swing states will win the election.
There you go.
Okay? And then the second one, I still say, I gave a talk yesterday afternoon before the debate, and people were saying, are there any potential October surprises? And I said at that point, the October surprise would be Taylor Swift's endorsement. Well, as turned out to be the September surprise. I still think that was more significant than the debate last night.
Yeah. John?
Let me close with my thought, and that is a weekend politics is a lifetime. What's astonishing absolutely astonishing is that the time between the former president was shot and the 2 to 3 days after the Republican convention, all of that was forgotten. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the years ago, that would still be playing out. But he got a bump that came out of the convention a little bit. But even, 48 hours afterwards, Americans, it's like a shiny object nowadays. As soon as you're done something, and particularly when you've had assassination attempts in your history and there are gun shootings as soon as schools open and you're used to that stuff, you move on to another issue. The question also is then, how does Israel play out? How does the Ukraine play out? How do other issues around Donald Trump play out over the next month? Because I tell you, as much as we're talking about the debate now, a week from now, it won't matter worth a damn. We'll just see the polls and we'll move on.
I agree.
David Schultz, John Wright, just, save that spot in your seat because we'll want to call you back soon to follow up on this. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We are actually going to invite you to head to my Twitter feed because I've got the poll up there. I want to know who won. I just took that snapshot. So I'm not sure of what it says about the people who follow me, or maybe it's just about Twitter, whatever it happens to be. Right now, most of the people on my Twitter poll think that Trump was the winner, and we'll wait to see what happens as that falls on. If you want to follow up on that, Dave Trafford finds me on X. All right, we'll be back next week. We've got our comms panel on, and we'll get into some of the Canadian politics because there was a little bit of that intrigue going on here on this side of the border over the summer as well. It's Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Aaron Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.